About a year ago, I made a video about what I wanted to see in the Greenskins rework, and for me, the number one thing was this mount for the tiny little Goblin Great Shaman. Probably one of the most underrated lords in the game, and one of my personal favorites up here on a spider. He makes a great choice against Bretonnia. A lot of people complained in that video that they thought this was going to be wildly overpowered. Turns out it's not. I mean, he still only has a pretty small amount of leadership. I want to say it's 55 base. This is Way here, playing the Greenskins. A similar build to what he took me the other day as the Empire, but instead we've got the Goblin Great Shaman here. He's got Vindictive Glare, Sneaky Stabbing, and Gork will fix it for some speed debuffs, in addition to the Poison Missiles and Melee. Quite strong. Don't even try. It gives ability recharge and does cause single target damage, so pretty decent there. Got some Error Boys and the Rusty Errors, 3 Black Orcs, bunch of Goblins, Doom Divers, and Hammer of Gork. Goblobber, not the Goblobber. To the Hammer of Gork, Goblin, Rock Lobber, rather. Got some Mounted Yeoman Archers, a few Questing Knights here for Bretonnia, a couple of Paladins, Fey Enchantress, bunch of mobs up front, some Peasant Archers, as well as a Foot Squire, some more Knights over there, including the Companions of Quenelle. So you can see right off the bat, the Bretonnian's going to try and dive in with the Paladins, but between, again, the Poison Missiles and the Gork will fix it. Their speed is going to be significantly debuffed down to 30 speed, and if the Howdah can stay in range to keep making contact, the Poison will apply as well. So that is quite impressive. That Vindictive Glare comes in, and between the Bowfire and everything else, those Paladins are taking significant damage, already drawing a regrowth there as the Orc Boys soak in the front line. Foot Squires definitely will beat them, no questions asked. The Goblins, same thing. It will take a decent amount of time, though. In the meanwhile, this elite artillery can be pounding away. I guess not elite artillery, but decent homing artillery, pounding that elite cav. Very good stuff. Goblin Great Shaman, the nice thing is obviously the Arachnarok mount, quite strong. Again, low leadership, but 120 armor, quite a bit of HP. It's got the Poison Missiles, Poison Melee attacks, Armor Piercing Anti-Large. Not the most weapon strength in the world, relatively low for a monster in this price range, but it is pretty solid. Yeah, the armor in particular quite good, which is why it's very good against Bretonnia, since they do generally lack AP tools. Speaking of which, the Black Orcs are just kind of hanging out right now on top of the artillery crews, trying to soak some of those missiles of the Mounted Yeomen firing in. Mounted Yeomen won't do a lot to Black Orcs. They will do a little bit of damage, but we got kind of this pitched engagement in the forest. Another big benefit of the Spider mount is that it of course has Strider. All spiders have Strider. Try saying that 5 times fast. And yeah, the Goblin Great Shaman, no different. He will fight just fine in the forest and kind of on these hills. This is the Volksgrad map, and Greenskins player setting up with the artillery up on the high ground. You don't have great direct line of sight, but you don't really need it with the... what are they? Doom Divers. Another big blob fight here. If we take a look, debuffs. Gork will fix it, and again, the poison as the Goblin Great Shaman tries to pull away. This is a lot of Bretonnian resources here. We've got the 2 Paladins, Knights of the Realm, some Terrified Peasants, Foot Squires. Fey Enchantress has taken a significant amount of damage from the Spider as well. You do kind of have to use her in melee to get appropriate value. Nice wobbing pop there as the Black Orcs start to get involved a little bit in combat here. They will absolutely mollywop those Foot Squires, just pound them into the ground. Absolutely insane. Knights of the Realm also, like up against Goblins and such with WA active, they will actually trade pretty cost effectively. It doesn't last too long. Already down, but still, those Knights are definitely taking significant damage. The Archers, free to get through and start docking again. Yeah, let's go with that. Start spreading that Daka around again. Another Paladin gets caught out alone, and this is a little bit of a problem. You can see, though, that the leadership is pretty low here, all things considered. If we can kind of mouse over it, you see damage sustained, attacked in the flank, under missile fire, some various modifiers there, so it doesn't take a lot to rout off the Spider. Goblin Great Shaman also can take a Wolf Mount, which gives him Vanguard. It's a pretty fun but very squishy choice. Probably not super competitive, but he is very fast and mobile in that way. But definitely I would say the monster mount's the best kind of role for him. Another Gork will fix it here, and again the poison, trying to keep the Fey Enchantress more or less pinned in place. She's down to 27 speed right now. If the Spider can get in contact and get that poison, yeah, you see she goes down to 8 speed. Just absolutely ridiculous. Fey Enchantress quickly getting terrified. Does manage to get a regrowth on herself, but probably not likely to actually die here. But the Greenskins line's holding for the time being. There's been absolute slugging back and forth with this kind of a build. Artillery have used up a lot of their ammunition, but also have taken some damage as well. The Hammer of Gork has been shut down, and we just got the two Doom Divers here. Yeoman moving in up against the Rusty Airs. Rusty Air is actually a decent target. They do have okay stats, but they'll probably be able to rout off this Doom Diver crew at the very least. But here comes the Spider catching the Fey Enchantress once again. The Fey Enchantress, I really like specifically the Spider to counter her because of the poison and kind of control ability there. And likewise the Spider, most Greenskins units don't, but don't do magic damage. But the Spider obviously does not, and that Sneaky Sabin also doesn't imbue magic damage, as does Fists of Gork, which you might think, like, hey, up against Grail Knights, who have physical resistance, and, you know, other units with physical resistance, you might want magic damage against Bretonnia. And while that is true, like, Vindictive Glare will give you some magic damage, the Fae has very heavy magic resistance on her Unicorn, so it's not a great thing, you know, it's better to have the physical damage rather in that situation, right? Especially if you can break Blessing of the Lady, which is possible to do, like the Fey Enchantress having been routed already once. I guess it's more leadership conditional, right? So she does currently have the Blessing of the Lady, but we'll see. The Bretonians still have a lot of missiles. They're going to kind of pull back and try and use up the rest of them, so we'll fast forward a little bit through this kind of third quarter here as the Greenskins set up their lines. They're going to try and return fire as best they can with these Savage Orcs here. Likewise, the Goblin Great Shaman just popping those Vindictive Glares. It's a very cheap spell, very good for sniping these characters on horseback. Speaking of which, they're going to be chasing some more of the bowmen off, those Rusty Airs there. Savage Orcs shooting a little bit at the Foot Squires. Decent AP values. I think they have something like 6 AP, which is on par with crossbows. Some crossbow units. In fact, all crossbow units, I think, are about there, maybe even slightly lower. The Spider, again, the poison and the speed means it can pretty much catch up all of these infantry, so although the Bretonnian player is just kind of trying to run away for the most part while these other forces come reunify, of course, peasants and men-at-arms and things, relatively slow. They will be caught by the Spider and terrified away very quickly. Paladins come back. Gork will fix it, used on them once again to get terrified away. We do have a big old charge of some Knights here, so we'll pop it back into regular speed. Bretonnians making a charge with the Knights of the Realm. Quick hit and run there. Honestly, would have been better to try and fix them in the front with the peasants, perhaps, but right now they're all just kind of hanging back still, so a little bit of a disjointed attack from the Bretonnian player at this point. Balance power still very close, but the longer it goes on, the Fey Enchantress really doesn't have a whole lot of healing left. This Howdah is going to not necessarily be a Mortis engine, but it's kind of like a very, very weak Mortis engine, continuously poisoning and slightly damaging units in an AoE around it. Not to mention these Black Orcs are fresh now, right? You can see a lot of the Bretonnian Knights are also relatively fresh, but they're pretty tired. The Black Orcs are completely fresh, it looks like, yeah. So they're going to be fighting at full kind of capacity here, whereas these Foot Squires, you can see they're tired. The peasants and so on are tired. The Knights, obviously the Grail tier Knights, which I don't think there are actually any, have perfect vigor. Knights of the Realm, though, again, tired and such, so that could play a pretty big role in the late game here. The fact that the Spider Shaman is still alive, too, and hasn't managed to be routed off is very important. Paladins now coming for a big old alpha strike, so to speak, rush, kind of all around, surround, and the Spider thankfully has plenty of Black Orcs here to support. He's having a tough time even pulling through his own Black Orcs, but the Fey Enchantress got routed off there. She did manage to get one more regrowth on herself as she was getting routed just before she actually popped the rout. And you can see, speaking of routing, Goblin Great Shaman getting very, very low on health and leadership at this point. Thankfully, he's able to terrify away the Paladin and these Knights here. Knights of the Realm cycle charging quite well. Black Orcs are holding just fine, though. They've already got 106 kills here, 59, 100 kills there. So they have no problem holding out against this kind of peasant and knight tide here. So back into fast forward as we get another kind of box up. And I guess there's still a few yeomen here with a tiny bit of ammunition left, but really not much for it. Absolutely wild battle, so big thanks to Way for sending this one in. And nice to see the Goblin Great Shaman shine. I don't think he's necessarily the most competitive. I do think he's a pretty solid pick, particularly in certain matchups like this one, where your enemy may struggle with large armored monsters, especially those that have poison, and just the spell selection too is fantastic for self-buffing and other things. You can see the Enchantress actually getting slightly caught here. She does take a few missiles to the face. And Bretonnian player, again, just using up the last of his ammo on literally everything and then trying to figure out the best time to engage. Which really would be once these infantry fix from this side, then you rear charge with the knights, right? Sorry, I got some background noise going, guys. My apologies. I'm in the temporary setup, so still trying to get used to things. But anyway, Enchantress comes through. She's going to need to use her Drain if the Bretonnians have any chance of winning. But to do that, she needs to be in melee. That puts her within danger of the Spider. With her Drain, though, with all these infantry and with some timely cycle charging from these knights, there's a possibility of victory, but it's very slim. You can see finally reunifies there for an Earthblood, and we've seen this a couple times recently from some of these ladder games sent in. Definitely not following tournament rules, breaking the attacking rule for like a solid 5 minutes there, but it's all good. We're eventually going to get an engagement finally. Peasants move in, and the Knights support is a little bit too far away to get an actual rear charge, plus Wei is positioned an extra unit of Black Orcs over on the other side, so they're kind of spread out. They're not able to get a very clean kind of rear charge on the blob. Everything terrifies, and that's it. Very fun stuff. Yeah, big fan of the Goblin Great Shaman. I was before he got the Spider even. He was kind of one of like the most terrible lords in the game, but also pretty fun to use and could be good in niche situations. Here, though, look at that. Almost 5,000 damage value on the lad and the Spider. Absolutely insane. Just 20,000 damage, literally 20,000 damage almost against this Bretonnian army, which granted, some of that is inflated by healing on characters, but still very impressive. 111 kills. The Goblins did okay. They were reasonably cost effective. Orc boys, not quite so much. Black Orcs did their thing. Ended up tanking until the end, which was kind of the maybe the goal of the build. Maybe not necessarily one of the goals, but using them as kind of that backline. I do like that quite a bit. One of them did actually pay for themselves in terms of gold. Savage Orc Air Boys also very cost effective. Same things with the Rusty Airs. The Doom Divers actually, one of them paid for himself, one of them did not. This thing, though, the Hammer of Gork, between just its damage value alone, obviously it's paid for itself, but consider also the blinded debuff that was being applied. I wasn't really tracking, unfortunately, specifically where that was going, but regardless of what it was hitting, it's useful for the Greenskins, right? For Takeda here for his Bretonnians, yeah, Paladins had a bit of a tough time. Wow, 18 kills, 177 damage value on those peasants. That is quite impressive. These peasants also paid for themselves, so they get a slice of bread for the next 2 weeks. Let's see. Foot Squires here, one of them actually did pay for himself. The other one's had a little bit of a rough time. Pox Arrows, though, absolutely amazing. Knights of the Realm, kind of a mixed bag. All the cavalry, to be honest, had a pretty tough time. Besides the Yeoman Archers, and Yeoman Archers are one that Yeoman did get a slight buff in this last patch. The melee ones in particular got actually a pretty substantial buff. I have yet to try them much myself. Seems like they're performing quite well. Like here, they definitely paid for themselves. One of them even twice over. So that's pretty impressive, all things considered. Let's just quickly talk a little bit about the lad here. As far as kind of monster caster lords goes, he is pretty up there. Like I said, leadership is his biggest downside. And he's decently expensive. Like with that kit that we saw there, with those 3 spells, I'm assuming he has Sneaky Stealing because it's really good against the Enchantress. I mean, 2,700 points for something with only 55 leadership is tricky. You definitely have to manage him well, and it is relatively micro-intensive, especially in certain matchups where monsters already are a little bit tough to use, like, say, against Coast maybe, or Dwarfs. Definitely wouldn't recommend it there, obviously. But in a matchup where you might have to fight some enemy monsters, or again, if your opponent, like a Beastman, just so happen to be here, they're also a faction that can potentially struggle against large armored monsters, so maybe it's a use there, but Bretonnia is probably the best matchup for it. Interestingly enough, Empire could potentially shine as well if your opponent doesn't prepare for it correctly. Same thing for like High Elves. Lizardmen, I just like Skarsnik a little bit better in that matchup and taking a spider separately, but maybe he could do well there also. Norska, kind of a monster hunting faction, although Greenskins generally have a pretty good matchup against Norska. They just kind of crump him in the face, so I'll punt on that one. Skaven, definitely not. Tomb Kings, again, Bowshabti could be a problem. Yeah, maybe he could trade okay against Constructs, though. Vampire Coast, definitely not. Counts, maybe, but again, leadership is definitely an issue. Warriors of Chaos, you could try. Wood Elves, maybe not. Definitely a multitude of situations, like I said, especially in monster mashes, where he can be pretty useful. And self-buffing with Sneaky Stabbing to give him more offensive stats, you know, buffing his defense, essentially, with Itchy Nuisance, right, since he doesn't have that much melee defense. You can debuff your opponent's melee attack, basically counts as buffing his melee defense, right? You can hide himself with Night Shrouds. Curse the Bad Moon is also here, so it's a fun one, but definitely the speed control between Gorkle Fix It and the Poison does offer some upside, especially in a matchup with a lot of mobile units, like, again, Bretonnia. So there you go. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.